The Intercept recently published an article by Fang and Ryan Grimm that demonstrates how the Democratic Party puts up these barriers to progressives that they think aren't electorally viable, and we also learned why it's the case that the party continuously shuns progressives. It's because their reason for supporting candidates isn't based on policy at all. It's entirely contingent on the amount of money they think candidates will be able to raise in their election and for the party. So, just before we get into the article, this becomes clear as to why the party focuses so much on platitudes. It's because they stand for nothing. The only thing they care about is raising money from their donors, and they don't care who those donors are. So getting into the article, Ryan Grimm and Fang state, the way to win party support is to pass the phone test. In order to establish whether a person is worthy of official backing, DCCC operatives will, quote, Rolodex a candidate, according to a source familiar with the procedure. On the most basic level, it involves candidates being asked to pull out their smartphones, scroll through their contact lists, and add up the amount of money their contacts could raise or contribute to their campaigns. If the candidate's contacts aren't good for at least $250,000 or in some cases much more, they fail the test and party support goes elsewhere. And that paragraph right there shows you just how greedy the Democratic Party establishment is. Because do you think that grassroots candidates will be able to easily do something like this? Of course not. They're raising small dollar donations. The only candidates that will actually be able to do this and pass this test are the ones that are completely sold out and beholden to multinational corporations and billionaires. Hillary Clinton's, the Kamala Harris's, the Debbie Wasserman Schultz's, the Cory Booker's, that's who can pass these tests. But focusing so much on money isn't a new phenomenon for the Democratic Party or DCCC, because back when Rahm Emanuel ran the DCCC, he, quote, looked for wealthy candidates who could self-fund a race. So basically, if you can't raise a ton of money, if you don't have a super PAC, the DCCC and Democratic Party establishment, they think you're not viable, and then they decide not to endorse you. They go with someone who can actually raise money. And in this article, they provide you with numerous examples that illustrate exactly how focused the party really is on money. Now, the question is, how can you tell which candidate the establishment is backing if they're ostensibly remaining neutral throughout primaries? Well, the simultaneous announcement of endorsements from the top elected officials in the party is a way to send a signal that the party has chosen its candidate. So if one Democrat's leadership PAC decides to endorse a particular candidate in a primary or donate to their campaign, then usually Democrat organizations like Emily's List will follow suit and announce their endorsements the very same day. So that's a way you can determine who the establishment by and large is supporting. Now, Ryan Grimm and Fang actually conducted a qualitative analysis about races, and this is what they found. In what is perhaps the crux of the issue, the Democratic Party machinery can effectively shut alternative candidates out before they can even get started. I think that that's really important, so I'm going to reiterate what that line just said. The Democratic Party machinery can effectively shut alternative candidates out before they even get started. This is why there are so few progressives in Congress. I mean, you could basically count them on your hand. We have Tulsi Gabbard, Ro Khanna, I guess Keith Ellison maybe. He's iffy. I mean, there are so few progressives in Congress because the Democratic Party doesn't want them in Congress, because they don't want progressives who aren't going to raise money from multi-billion-dollar companies and billionaires. So I want to take you through a couple of the examples that show exactly how the DCCC and aggregate party establishment shuts out progressives. So when it comes to Jess King, she's a progressive running to represent the 16th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. Now, after trying to obtain endorsements from Democratic Party organizations like Emily's List, the Democratic Party establishment, by and large, has decided to instead shun her in favor of a corporate Democrat named Christina Hartman, who actually ran back in 2016. Now, when she ran in 2016, she broke fundraising records and ended up performing worse than Hillary Clinton in her district. But now that Hartman has decided to run again, even though she lost after raising a record-breaking number of money, the establishment is supporting her over a progressive like Jess King, specifically because Christina Hartman can raise more money. Now, there's also a school teacher named Karen Mallard who decided to run for Congress to represent Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. She originally met with a representative from Emily's List who promised to put her in contact with the DCCC. Instead, she was shunned. And then what happens next is perhaps as surprising as the Jess King story. So they endorsed someone who got into the race, presumably to make sure that the progressive candidate, Karen Mallard, didn't win. And the party endorsed that individual, their selected choice. That person dropped out. They still didn't endorse Karen. So another person got in, dropped out, and they still didn't endorse Karen when it was left wide open and she was the one candidate in the race. So finally, they ended up recruiting someone else named Elaine Luria because they were more confident that Elaine could actually raise more money than Karen. And when it comes to Emily's List, even though they seemed enthusiastic about Karen's campaign, they decided to only help out Mallard by handing her a list of consultants that she could hire. That's it. Now, as Karen states in the article here, she's a school teacher. She doesn't have money to hire consultants who charge millions of dollars each year. That's all Emily's List was doing. Now, there's other examples. Jack Love decided to run to represent the 3rd District of Nevada and reached out to the state Democratic Party office, but they shunned him. Surprise, surprise. Instead, the DCCC decided to back Susan Lee, who also has the endorsement of Harry Reid, who, even though he's retired, is still very prominent in Nevadan politics. And they decided to back Susan Lee because, for the most part, she's able to fund her own campaign because she's married to a wealthy casino executive. Now, we also have James Thompson, who's running once again to represent District 4 of Kansas, and he says the DCCC doesn't think that district is winnable at all, and they're deciding to stay out of this race and unilaterally disarm, even though James Thompson was just 7,500 votes away from winning last time. A lot of people are talking about how 2018 could potentially be a blue wave election, but yet they're choosing to not even pursue this district. But Thompson actually doesn't seem to mind because he says he doesn't want the DCCC support, because what that support entails is problematic. They require him to commit to arbitrary rules where you don't say anything negative about your primary opponent, and they also force candidates to spend money on TV ads where that would not be effective. Now, there's also another district, the 2nd District of Nebraska, where the DCCC and other Democratic organizations fell over themselves to endorse a Democrat named Brad Ashford with a very conservative voting record. In fact, one of the most conservative voting records during his time in office, because he was in office before. So a progressive named Kara Eastman is also running in that district, and even though she was told by the DCCC that they would remain neutral, well, they chose a side. They want Brad Ashford to take over that seat, a conservative Democrat. And last but not least, in the 21st District of Texas, congressional Democrats have endorsed a former Republican, Joseph Kopser, over a progressive like Derek Crow, since, surprise, surprise, Kopser raised more money. This is the Democratic Party. And those aren't the only examples. The article is very long. There's a ton of examples that really go into great detail about how the party is hyper-focused on money. That's all they care about. They don't care about policy at all. If you can raise a lot of money, and we're talking a lot of money, they'll back you. And most of the time, they want you to have connections with big donors because that's how you raise money quickly. You see, if you raise money exclusively through grassroots methods, that's going to take some time. You could put out the call and say, hey, I need some support, donate $27 if you can to my campaign, $1. But, that's a gradual buildup of money. They want money fast. That's why they shun progressives. It's clear now. This article really lays it out in great detail. And it just shows that the party is rotten to the core. But Democratic Party officials are not by nature moved to deep reflection by election losses. They have a plan and they're sticking to it. The bad news for grassroots activists is that the Democratic Party's leaders cannot be reasoned with, but they can be beaten. And that's exactly what we have to do. We have to beat them. Now, this article doesn't talk about candidates like Amy Vilela, but Ruben Kihuen, who was the incumbent Democrat, was being challenged by a progressive like Amy Vilela. The race was wide open once Keywood announced that he would not be seeking re-election due to sexual harassment allegations that surfaced against him. And all of a sudden, these establishment figures jump into the race. Because you can't have a grassroots-funded candidate ever win, because if they get into Congress, what's going to happen? Well, they're still going to raise money through grassroots methods, and that's not good for the aggregate party. They want prolific fundraisers like Nancy Pelosi, who could get in there and raise millions of dollars not only for themselves, but for the rest of the party. I mean, how do you think you advance to a leadership role in the party in the first place? You've got to raise a lot of money. That's what it's all about. It's always been about the money. So we have to beat them, and we have to purge the party of these corporatists. Because so long as the party relies exclusively on money to determine who is viable, then the party is not going to represent us. They're going to represent those donors because they want more money. It's going to be a self-perpetuating cycle until we get in there like a wrecking ball and break up the establishment, that status quo, and we do things our way. We run based on policy. This article it's just huge. I would highly recommend that you read it thoroughly because I barely scratched the surface, and there's a lot in there that really explains just how corrupt the Democratic Party is.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.